The words of my wedding vows were written on a crisp sheet of parchment, but before I could finish the opening sentence, a violent downward yank pulled my custom medical wig completely off my head. The cool conservatory air struck my bare skin as my mother, Beatrice Ryan, stepped out from behind me, holding the brunette locks in the air for everyone to see. "Now he can see the bald cancer patient he's really marrying," she announced into the microphone, her voice echoing off the glass walls. From the front row, my sister Chloe let out a sharp laugh, mockingly calling out, "Let's see if he still says I do." I stood completely exposed before my 114 guests, my heart pounding in absolute silence until my groom, Silas Thorne, reached out and took the microphone with a cold smile that promised absolute ruin. The silence that followed was not the heavy, gossiping whisper my mother had anticipated, but a rigid, absolute freezing of the entire room. To understand how this public execution of my dignity backfired into the total destruction of my family's social and financial existence, you have to look at the unique arrangement of the 114 people sitting in those rows. They were not my mother's country club associates or the superficial clients who frequented her high-end bridal boutique in Crestview Hills. As I stood on that altar, my bare scalp glistening under the soft chandeliers, my eyes swept across the third row, locking on to Dr. Robert Evans, the chief of oncology who had managed my treatment, and Sarah Jenkins, the lead structural engineer from my independent infrastructure design firm. My biological family had spent the last 2 decades evaluating human life purely through the lens of physical symmetry, expensive labels, and curated social media feeds. My mother had built her entire reputation on selling the illusion of perfection, managing a luxury boutique that catered exclusively to the wealthiest political dynasties in the state. Because my younger sister Chloe was born with the conventional, model-like features my mother worshipped, she was instantly elevated to the status of the family's crowning achievement. My parents emptied their retirement accounts and took out predatory secondary mortgages to fund Chloe's dream of becoming a luxury travel influencer, buying her designer sports cars and paying for elite styling teams. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, deeply analytical daughter who preferred the complex calculations of environmental engineering and urban water filtration design. Because I refused to dress for their validation or participate in their empty high society luncheons, I was treated as a genetic mistake, a plain, embarrassing background figure who was systematically erased from family photos because my presence allegedly ruined the family's carefully styled color palette. The true depth of their toxic nature revealed itself 14 months ago. On the exact afternoon my biopsy came back positive for stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma. I remember sitting at the long mahogany dining table, my hands trembling as I shared the terrifying medical diagnosis with the people who had raised me. My mother did not offer a single embrace. Instead, she let out a sharp gasp of horror, looked at my father, and immediately began lamenting how an illness in the household would tarnish the pristine, high-end image of her bridal boutique. They were deeply ashamed of my vulnerability, viewing a life-threatening illness not as a human crisis requiring love, but as a dirty family secret that could damage their social standing. When the aggressive chemotherapy treatments caused my hair to fall out in heavy clumps, my mother barred me from entering the upper levels of the house whenever she hosted her elite clients or neighborhood gatherings. She forced me to live entirely in the isolated basement guest room, taking my corporate salary as rent while telling our neighbors a deceptive lie that I had moved out of state for a luxury wellness sabbatical. I fought for my survival in the damp quiet of that basement, managing severe nausea and terrifying fevers completely alone. While upstairs, my mother and sister recorded glamorous lifestyle videos, utterly indifferent to whether I drew my next breath. Yet that isolation became the laboratory of my ultimate independence. While my family assumed I was weeping in the dark, I was using my laptop to finalize the patents for a revolutionary, decentralized solar-powered water filtration system. Within 8 months, my independent firm, Emerald Infrastructure, secured 3 major municipal utility contracts, generating millions in corporate revenue that I quietly protected behind an ironclad wall of private trusts and anonymous corporate legal teams. It was during the implementation of one of these green infrastructure projects at the Municipal Research Pavilion that I met Silas Thorne. As a senior biomedical research scientist and the principal heir to the Thorne Medical Foundation, Silas lived a life dedicated to deep intellect and institutional purpose, completely detached from the superficial flash of the corporate climbing world. He did not look at my illness with disgust or pity. He saw my fierce resilience, my brilliant mathematical mind, and the absolute beauty of a spirit that refused to break. He became my steadfast anchor, sitting by my bedside during my final chemotherapy cycles, holding my hand through the darkness until the glorious day my medical team declared I was in complete clinical remission. When Beatrice and Chloe discovered that the daughter they had hidden away in the basement was marrying into the Thorne dynasty, the most prestigious multi-billion-dollar family in the region, their historical neglect instantly turned into a burning, venomous jealousy. My mother tried to aggressively seize control of the wedding planning, demanding that the ceremony be held at a massive public venue to serve as a marketing campaign for her boutique. When Silas and I firmly set our boundaries, choosing the elegant, private glass house of Oak Ridge Crest and inviting only 114 individuals who had actively supported my survival and my career, my mother viewed it as a direct insult to her authority. She and Chloe arrived at the venue dressed in extravagant, attention-grabbing emerald silk gowns. Their faces twisted into masks of silent rage as they realized they could not exploit our union for their personal clout. They spent the hours leading up to the ceremony quietly whispering in the corridors, executing a monstrous plan to ensure that my moment of absolute joy would be converted into a public horror show. As I stood at the altar, looking into Silas's eyes while the acoustic strings drifted into silence, I felt a sudden, aggressive shadow materialize behind me. My mother's hand clamped onto the base of my custom medical hairpiece, yanking it backward with a sharp, violent force that snapped my neck back and exposed my bare, healing scalp to the bright light of the glass dome. Chloe's mocking laughter echoed through the front rows, a calculated, ugly sound meant to signal my absolute social execution. My mother stood there holding my wig in the air, waiting for the prestigious guests to gasp in secondhand embarrassment, waiting for Silas to look away in aesthetic disgust, waiting for me to break down into hysterical tears and run from the altar in total shame.
Instead, the 114 guests did something entirely unexpected. They didn't look down. Row by row, the doctors, the engineers, the nurses, and the veteran project managers stood up from their seats. They didn't stand up in confusion. They stood up with the synchronized, overwhelming mass of a physical human wall, their eyes burning with a collective righteous fury directed straight at my mother. Silas did not flinch for a fraction of a second. His eyes remained locked onto mine. his expression filling with an unshakable, protective adoration that made my bare head feel like it was adorned with a crown of pure gold. He stepped forward, calmly took the master wireless microphone from the central audio stand, and turned his body to face the room, his voice echoing through the high glass ceilings with the absolute authority of a military commander. "What this pathetic display has just revealed," Silas said, his voice smooth, low, and incredibly lethal, "is the absolute difference between simulated status and real human dignity. Beatrice, you believed that by exposing my wife's battle scars, you could make her look small in front of this room, but every single one of the 114 people standing in this congregation is here because they helped her build an empire while she fought for her life. Dr. Evans managed her oncology sector. Sarah Jenkins manages the civil engineering contracts for her multi-million-dollar infrastructure firm. You brought a knife to a corporate and legal gunfight, thinking you were dealing with a helpless victim?" My mother's arrogant smile instantly collapsed, her jaw dropping slightly as she took a panicked step backward, the medical hairpiece dropping from her trembling fingers onto the polished stone floor. Let me make something explicitly clear to you and your daughter," Silas continued, his gray eyes narrowing as he stepped down from the altar platform, pinning my mother with his gaze. "Your boutique on Crestview Way operates entirely within the commercial plaza owned by the Oak Ridge Realty Trust. Exactly 48 hours ago, the Thorne Medical Foundation completed a total institutional buyout of that entire real estate portfolio to build our new regional health center. More importantly, Cassandra's firm, Emerald Infrastructure, holds the primary structural debt link on that commercial block. The moment you stepped onto this private property and committed a premeditated physical assault on a medical survivor, recorded live by our 3 documentary broadcast cameras, you triggered the absolute moral turpitude and immediate forfeiture clauses embedded in your commercial tenancy agreement." A sharp, terrified sob escaped from my sister Chloe's throat as she clutched her mother's silk sleeve, her face draining of all color as she realized the massive corporate trap that had just snapped shut around their lives. "You have exactly 48 hours to remove your inventory from our property before our corporate legal team permanently locks the doors and seizes your remaining commercial assets to satisfy the immediate breach penalties," Silas announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "Your business is officially evicted, your lines of credit within the Crestview banking network are being frozen due to active criminal harassment filings, and this entire high-definition video sequence is currently being routed directly to the state licensing board and the local news syndicates. You are completely finished." At that exact moment, my architectural mentor stood up at the front row, clapping his hands with a deafening, thunderous pride. Within 5 seconds, all 114 guests broke into a massive, unified standing ovation, their cheers echoing off the glass walls, creating a roaring shield of love and reverence that completely obliterated the pathetic, frantic whimpering of my mother and sister. Beatrice and Chloe realized they had become instant social pariahs in the very city they had spent their lives trying to conquer. They were roughly intercepted by the venue's elite security detail, who gripped them by their silk sleeves and physically marched them out of the conservatory doors, throwing them out onto the gravel driveway in full view of the arriving catering staff, their faces permanently stained with the absolute ruin of their own malice. The financial and social liquidation of the Ryan family was swift, total, and beautifully devastating. By Monday morning, the video of the incident had spread through the wealthy estate networks like wildfire, causing an immediate, massive corporate cancellation of my mother's bridal boutique. Elite clients refused to pick up their custom dresses. High society weddings completely revoked their contracts, and the local country club board held an emergency session to permanently strip my parents of their family membership due to gross public misconduct. Forced to comply with the immediate 48-hour eviction notice from our legal team, my mother had to liquidate her entire high-end inventory at a massive financial loss to prevent total bankruptcy. Without the boutique's revenue to fund their artificial lifestyle, the bank moved swiftly to foreclose on their sprawling suburban mansion in Crestview Hills. Chloe's lifestyle influencer channels were completely flooded with thousands of comments condemning her cruelty, forcing her to delete her digital presence entirely as her corporate sponsors dropped her within hours. Left completely broke and toxic to any reputable circle, my parents and sister were forced to rent a cramped, drafty two-bedroom apartment near the industrial shipping yards on the far edge of the state, their frantic, weeping letters begging for my financial mercy completely blocked and shredded by our corporate legal counsel. Meanwhile, back in our beautiful, sunlit world, the ceremony continued with a profound, unshakable joy. I stood at the altar with my bare head held high, looking into the eyes of my husband, reading my vows with a clear, resonant voice that was met with tears of absolute admiration from the people who mattered. Silas and I walked down the aisle as husband and wife under a shower of white rose petals, stepping forward into a life of magnificent abundance and systemic purpose. Together, we utilized the profits from Emerald Infrastructure and the Thorn Foundation to establish the Cassandra Ryan Center, a multi-million-dollar medical recovery facility that provides free, high-end housing, psychological support, and specialized medical wigs for young women fighting cancer entirely alone. Standing in the central atrium of that beautiful, thriving building, holding my husband's hand as the afternoon light poured through the massive glass windows, I felt a deep, permanent peace, completely free from the shadows of the past, reigning supreme as the absolute architect of my own destiny. This narrative illustrates a profound sociological and psychological reality. Family structures built exclusively on superficial vanity, transactional affection, and the rootless exploitation of a child's vulnerability are inherently unstable and destined for absolute self-destruction. When parental figures view a child's life-threatening medical crisis as a social embarrassment rather than a human tragedy, they reveal a complete absence of emotional intelligence and strategic foresight. The golden child's unearned indulgence inevitably breeds a fragile, incompetent character that collapses instantly under the weight of public accountability, while the systematic isolation of the targeted child forces them to forge an unshakable, diamond-like resilience and independent professional capability. In the grand arena of human history, simulated social clout will always shatter when confronted by genuine institutional power, and those who attempt to weaponize trauma will eventually find the weapons turned directly upon themselves. When your own biological family views your darkest moments of physical survival as a social blemish and attempts to publicly humiliate you at the altar of your ultimate happiness, they have permanently severed their right to exist in your presence. Do not waste a single drop of your life's energy weeping over their cruelty, hiding your scars, or wishing for their validation. True self-reliance means having the absolute courage to stand tall in your authentic truth, holding your head high without a single drop of shame, and allowing the unyielding brilliance of your survival to shine directly into the darkness of their malice. Construct an ironclad, impenetrable wall of legal, physical, and financial boundaries around your life, and align yourself with high-integrity partners who honor your scars as badges of supreme honor. When the inevitable consequences of their own blindness bring your tormentors to absolute ruin, let the silent success of your beautiful new empire be their only answer. Protect your peace, build your future in the light, and never look back at the monsters you left behind.